Welcome back. Ashli Babbitt was the only person to die inside the U.S. Capitol during the protests on January 6, 2021. She was the victim of an unlawful shooting, and the government must own up to that, particularly now, because the government watchdog group, Judicial Watch, is taking the lead and has filed a $30 million wrongful death lawsuit against the federal government. The lawsuit, filed on the eve of the third anniversary of January 6, also claims assault and battery along with a number of negligence issues. Babbitt was shot and killed by then Lieutenant Michael Byrd of the Capitol Police. Further, the lawsuit claims the Capitol Police knew or should have known that Lieutenant Byrd was prone to behave in dangerous or otherwise incompetent manners. Tom Fitton is a true patriot. He is the president of Judicial Watch, and he joins us now on the Dobbs Tonight show. Good to have you with us, Tom, and welcome. Thank you for being with us. I have to, first of all, congratulate you and Judicial Watch for bringing this lawsuit, because on its face, this was a scurrilous act, in my opinion. It is an act that all of us who've watched that video will never forget that video. A police officer firing a weapon surrounded by other people. It's a miracle he didn't shoot somebody else as well. But at point blank range, just killing this woman who was unarmed. So thank you for bringing the lawsuit, and thanks for all the Judicial Watch is doing here. Give us your sense about the claims that you're making and what you are expecting in court.
Well, Lou, it's good to see you in this format again, first off. But, you know, I kind of go back to what my initial response was to this as a citizen. I can't believe he shot her. I just can't believe it. After everything we know about police shootings and how the police are supposed to behave in terms of their exercise of deadly force, he broke every rule in the book. And it was reckless and negligent and all the rest. And Ashli Babbitt, there was no basis for shooting her. And of course, January 6th is being used as a fulcrum by the left to leverage the destruction of their political opposition and to rig the election in 2024. So they have zero interest in getting justice for Ashli, whether it be at the Justice Department run by Biden administration appointees or at the Capitol Hill Police, who have been pushing the political narrative of the left there since January 6th, that they did no wrong and that Ashli deserved what she got. No, she didn't. And there was no good reason to shoot her. We go through meticulously in the lawsuit how every rule that a police officer has to follow, and specifically the rules a Capitol Hill police officer has to follow under their own regulations, were broken by Lieutenant Byrd. And we make the revelation that right after he shot and killed her without reason and justification, he issued a radio call saying shots fired, and he was being shot at. That was false. Was he trying to justify his shooting through this false radio call? And then secondly, we found, there was this other news, this has been public. I'm sure you've talked about this. He left his gun in the bathroom in the Capitol Visitor Center, the main facility through which the public enters the Capitol Hill complex. His loaded weapon. This is a gun he used 2 years later to kill Ashli. But we also found
Go ahead. It's horrific. I mean, it is horrific. And the further revelations that in that lawsuit, I have to tell you, I think most people will be stunned to hear what you have asserted in that claim about his record as a police officer, about his ability or lack of it with a firearm. I don't understand, frankly, after reading the complaint you're filing, I don't for a moment understand why he was still in uniform with the Capitol Police.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question we raised in terms of the negligence, right? And he had his car, it looks like it was stolen by some juveniles, and he fired into the car, and bullets went astray, to houses nearby, at least one house. So these are the sorts of things that should have been concerning to his supervisors. But instead, he was the incident commander that day. And he shot Ashli, who was no threat to him or anyone else, shot into a crowd. You know, you look at that video, she gets shot, she falls back. There are I think 3 or 4 or 5 officers behind her, including one who's up front.
Right.
Only because he was professional did he not shoot into the area where the shot came, because he didn't know what was happening. I mean, that's how crazed it was. He had other officers being prepared to defend themselves because he shot into the crowd. And Ashli, of course, suffered.
And it also says, yeah, it suffered. Yeah, there were also so many people between Lieutenant Byrd, who was crouched, cowering in point of fact, before a crowd of unarmed people who were coming through the door. He fired his weapon with them. As bad a shot as it turns out he was, he could have killed any one of them on his side of that partition, as well as the officers you're talking about on the other side of it. But it also speaks to another issue. Why didn't those other police officers, if he was so concerned, why didn't they do something? They were managing the situation, and they didn't draw their weapons. They didn't squeeze off a round in the direction of an innocent woman. It just further condemns his conduct, his behavior, and his choices on that tragic day.
Well, and we've since seen that there were officers in much more significant and dire situations in terms of their personal safety who didn't unholster and fire their weapons.
Right.
He was the only one who shot anyone and that was the only gun that was fired that day was by him. So we've got this lawsuit against the federal government. It seeks $30 million for wrongful death for Aaron Babbitt, who's her widower, and her estate. And I tell you, what's interesting about this, Lou, is so the government is the defendant, right? But obviously Congress is at issue here, and the Capitol Hill Police. What is going to be the position of Congress in this case? Is Speaker Johnson going to take a more, I would say, is he going to own up to this? Is Congress going to own up to their misconduct that resulted in this death of this American citizen? And when you look at these videos, so what had happened was she was up there, things were relatively quiet, some other protesters arrived who were more aggressive. Police officers who were standing up against the door where she was left, and the protesters started banging the door. She became very distressed and asked, "What's going on? Are you going to do anything?" And then she went through the window. And I kind of looked at that scenario, and of course, she's dead, so I can't ask her.
Right.
Was she fleeing for safety? Was she seeking safety?
It could well have been. But whatever she was clearly and plainly unarmed. She was threatening no one. It makes no sense whatsoever. I want to ask you a couple of questions about what did follow that. And that was basically Lieutenant Michael Byrd disappeared from public view. And now we find out, because of your lawsuit, we find out that he was domiciled for 6 months at Andrews Air Force Base in a officer's suite for visiting traveling officers that is reserved for those officers there. He was kept there for 6 months out of public view. This looks in every way like a cover-up by Nancy Pelosi, the House leadership, the Capitol Police, and people are not even looking at that until you and Judicial Watch bring your lawsuit. It's stunning stuff.
We had uncovered this even prior to this lawsuit through a separate FOIA request and lawsuit. And remember, we didn't know his name until months after the shooting. In what other police officer involved shooting would the officer's name and identity be withheld for so long? And I don't need to tell you, I mean, you're a news guy. You know how police officer shootings are handled, both whether they're justified or seemingly unjustified. You don't want to, it's the worst thing to be involved in a shooting if you're an officer. And because you're subject to all sorts of scrutiny, potentially grand jury investigations.
Right.
There should have been a grand jury investigation, serious criminal investigation, both in D.C. and at the federal level. And of course, administratively, the D.C. Police, D.C. Capitol Police Department, the U.S. Capitol Police, they gave him a free pass as well and did nothing administratively or anything in terms of discipline. There was no
not only
for sure out of the government.
Yeah, they not only didn't do anything, they actually promoted the man. They actually, in point of fact, hid this man, covered up for him. He didn't even, as I understand it, didn't even file a report on that shooting, let alone face a shooting inquiry from any sort of internal affairs panel.
No, there was nothing substantial done. We uncovered that he refused to cooperate with investigators, and rather than force him to make a statement, as they could have under the regulations, typically the police officers operate under, they let him do an informal walkthrough for which he was never put under oath or held accountable for the statements, true or false, he may have made through that walkthrough. Virtually the key details we know about what Byrd was doing and how the government handled that case was only because of Judicial Watch. And so Speaker Johnson, in my view, should reopen this investigation into the shooting, among other things, really take a second look here. Because if January 6th means anything, it's supposed to mean accountability for people who did something wrong, including this officer.
Well,
and the government behind him covered it up.
Well, I think we have another problem now, and that's another problem in the Speaker's office, who also promised to release those videos, as did a previous Republican Speaker by the name of Kevin McCarthy. Neither one have delivered on their promises to release those videos, who are absolutely central to any sort of understanding on what happened that day. And it's clear that Nancy Pelosi, the Marxist Dems, don't want it to happen. And for some reason, neither do these Republican speakers that we've had in the last two iterations. I think Mike Johnson, by the way, just as a side note to all of this, Tom, I don't think he is the guy who's going to do the right thing based on his track record in the first 2 months of his speakership. Tom Fitton, we always count on you and Judicial Watch to do the right thing. And again, congratulations and our compliments and our thanks for what Judicial Watch is once again doing in the case of the Ashli Babbitt shooting. Thanks so much. Tom Fitton, President of Judicial Watch.